Welcome to the Kotak Workshop. This is part two of a two-part series on a really very old piece that we've been working on. In the first part, I had this lovely chair that we thought was Jacobean, but we do quite a bit of research with museum-grade curators, researchers that are trained and very professional, more professional and more experienced than I am. And also we put a request out to the community. And a big thanks to Simon Gilboy at Gilboys. Just a super amount of information, and he dug through his workshop books and came to a similar conclusion, which is actually the chair is a little bit later, we think from the time of Charles II. And here I will put up some pictures of similar style chairs, and you can see a couple of things. One, you can see the marquetry, and also you can see a sort of red oak colour, and that's really important in this restoration because as I received the chair from the owner, the seat area had been worn, as in the finish had been cut through in one area, looking like some water or something with alcohol in had cut through what looked like a shellac coating. Also the front, all the way through this video I refer to it as dog damage, but it turns out the owner has 5 cats, and as Simon put in his comments and an email to me, it looked much more like cat damage. So it's been damaged by cats, but the amount of surface area that had been damaged meant that the amount of surface areas I was trying to protect and keep sort of became about 50-50. And so I made some choices without the benefit of all the feedback, and hopefully I've dealt with it sensitively. And as we go through the video, you'll see what I did and what the result was. So Toffee and I are ready to start on the first stage of the restoration repair of this amazing chair. What we're going to do today is glue the legs with some traditional hide glue, and I'm also going to clean off some of the wax coating because it's uneven and it was added later, but very gently, and then give it a good clean and go from there. So this is the inside back of the chair, and you can see this split goes all the way along, but it does move when I squeeze it, so I'm going to put some hide glue into here and then clamp it. Okay, so this is now drying, and you can see that the glue has actually gone in and managed to wipe it off, which is the joy of using hide glue. So let that dry. In the meantime, I'm going to clean off some of the residue and the wax. I'm going to use a wax remover rather than a stripper. So wax remover removes old traditional natural finishes and allows you to see the condition of the wood underneath. It dissolves away old wax, shellac, lacquer, oil and traditional varnish, yet is so mild it does not affect the natural sheen of the wood. Always use this product in preference to strong paint stripper, unless the finish to be removed is paint, polyurethane, varnish, cellulose. So it's a bit gentler, but it dissolves the wax that was put on much later. It does say to use wire wool, but I'm not going to use wire wool with oak, especially if it's going to get a little bit wet later on, because some of the acids in the oak can react with the metal to cause staining. So I'm going to use a very gentle scourer. See, it's picking it up. In the Victorian era, where it was traditional for furniture to be darkened, which was a fashion of the time, big debates about whether it's right to go back to the pre-Victorian or to leave it as an antique piece. And what I've had to do through this conservation slash restoration is balance all of those competing tensions. And I hope as you follow the video along, you'll see that that's what I've tried to be true to. There will be some people that disagree, and there are some people that strongly agree. And that's the beauty of doing something like this. And I've really appreciated the support and the comments and the feedback. Please continue to do so down below. Hit the like, subscribe, notification. So you can see in here, this beautiful colour of the wood is coming up as this wax and years of, we're still keeping the patina of the wood, just taking off the crud layer. I think that's going to be good. Now that varnish wax remover is working, I don't really want it to dry on, so I'm going to clean, actually wash the chair with a tiny bit of Murphy wood cleaner, a very, very small amount in a large amount of water, just to clean out the remainder of the remover. So that's the chair a lot cleaner without having done any physical change, as in to the surface, like sanding would remove material, but that's the sort of stuff that's been coming off. So I'm now going to let it dry and let this repair dry as well before we can start feeding it again. As I'm cleaning up the carving, you can see that it's actually much more detailed and has been covered up. As I'm cleaning, the doubts that I had about maybe being a bit too severe are evaporating as details that are coming out that you just couldn't see before in the carvings, just beautiful. I thought the top was less intricate, but actually it's got incredible extra detail in here. And then around these parts, a real design is starting to pop as well, and it's making more sense that the parquetry is part of it, because I was worried in some of the discussions we've been having with researchers and people that I'm emailing with about this chair, that maybe this had been put in later. But when I start to see it in this cleaner context, I'm a lot more comfortable with the way that we've chosen to go. Okay, let's now talk about wood filler for this repair at the front of this chair. What I've got here is a piece of oak that I have simulated the dog bites. I want to sensitively find some way of taking the rough edges off the exposed wood and using a bit of filler just to get into the gaps between it so that they don't break off and give it some strength. Now, regularly on more modern pieces of furniture I use wood filler. You get generally two types. There's a water soluble one part, or more of an epoxy two part, and you also get the full epoxy type. This is terracotta milliput, which sets incredibly hard underwater. However, I just don't feel right about using that sort of modern chemistry on something that's potentially 400 years old. In the comments from the previous video, which I really appreciate people taking the time to answer, suggestion was beeswax, as I had said. This is the beeswax block that I was talking about using. But a great comment about mixing it with a bit of turpentine and a hardener. I've got some balsamic turpentine coming. It's going to be delivered today or tomorrow. But in the meantime, I've got some pure turpentine, which is pure gum turpentine. Turpentine is an extract from pine trees, and it was available and used around the time that this chair was made. So that would be a fair product to use. Of course, beeswax was well known. So just for my little experimentation, I've got some yellow beeswax beads. I've also got some carnauba wax, which I might use. And then for a hardening agent, I wanted something that also would have been of the period and time. So looking to candle making, where beeswax was used to harden candles, often there was extracts from tallow and beef, which nowadays we would call stearin. So stearin is added to candle wax to harden the finished candle, giving it better burning qualities, depth of colour and opacity. So although it wouldn't have been as refined, certainly a hardening material for making lots of church candles and reading candles would have been something similar to this. So I've got three products that I'm going to mix together, warm up in a couple of different ways, and then I'm going to test them out on this piece of oak with my fake dog bites in, so that I can get a feel for what it might look like and work like before actually using something on the chair. Okay, it's been a few days with our little test piece here. What I want to do now is sand off some of the surface wax and see how our samples have done in the dog tooth marks. So already I can tell that it forms a nice edge, and the filler that had the sawdust in is a little bit darker, so I want to see how it takes a stain as well. But just on hardness, certainly is, you can tell it's wax, but it's got a little bit more strength to it. Let's see what it's like with the stain. So we'll start with a very light. Now, this oak that I'm using here obviously is much newer than the chair, so it's going to be a different colour. What I'm trying to see is, does the wax take up the stain? It's an oil-based wax. We're going to be using a hard wax oil, so it should Now on the chair itself, because it's much older and has got a lot more age, and I didn't sand it very hard, so it's still got a lot of the hundreds of years of smoke and coal and whatever tobacco that's in it. It's going to be a lot darker. But what I'm looking for is for the filler to take on the tone, which it does. So as you would expect, it is just drinking it up, which is why I was keen to get on and do that. just, while it's still a bit soft, rubbing this wax into the worst bits. It really is a tiny amount. And as we've said, it is quite incredible just how little you need. It smells quite nice as well. Okay, it's been a few days with our wax filler. It's been drying. I've had it in a nice, warm, dry kitchen, and I'm very pleased with how it's coming on. Lots and lots of feedback, emails, comments to the last video. Thank you so much. That's been incredibly helpful. And also wonderful email dialogue with Tom Johnson of Thomas Johnson Antique Furniture Restoration in Gorham, Maine. What an absolute pleasure. Really helpful, very friendly, some great advice, so thank you for that. We're ready to go on to the next stage, which is taking off the excess wax, and then just checking that, for example, the repairs that were done some time ago colour match where we're trying to get to. A bit of colour matching and a bit of stain, and then a hard wax oil, and then wax and finish. One thing to point out at this stage is this loose bit at the back of the seat. It was originally nailed. I do have some reproduction nails. These are made in the traditional style. However, they're not original. That isn't structural. The seat sits in there just fine. So I'm not going to pull out the broken nail, and I'm not going to replace it. Also, some of this patina and stains, quite rightly people have commented to leave them. I have lightened slightly the ring stains at the back, but they will stay. Ultimately they'll just be slightly more muted and not as obvious. Up around the top, you can definitely see a bell now with 2 extra pieces of inlay that have appeared, and just looking really, really lovely, and I want to try and preserve that as much as we can. Let's do a close-up. So I haven't taken the wax off yet, that's where I filled it in, but this bell, I think it's a bell, is quite prominent now. It's also worth talking about what will have happened to this chair over the centuries since it was made. It was possibly made for a special purpose, a wedding, a knighthood, following a pilgrimage, which is one of the areas where we followed the inlaid bell motif. Could that be a Canterbury bell? Could it be a symbol? Could it be from the family bell? The family that owned this chair is actually Carter, so is there a link to the Carter family in Yorkshire? These are unanswered questions, but the start of a journey, all because we expose some of the underlying marquetry. Just using a lollipop stick, very soft, and just scraping off wax. Also filled those nail holes. So it's just I guess you would call it Scotch Brite, but I'm just taking the wax off, and it's also slightly buffing it, but that is getting this repair back to what it was before. So what I'm trying to do is take off the surface extruded wax, the wax on the outside of the shape, and just leave it in the dog chew parts. Oh, that's good. Pleased with that. For the inlay, I am going to put a very light layer of shellac on, just to act as a sealer, so that as we go to the next stage it doesn't stain into the light wood. Now, although shellac is a traditional product, this chair predates it, so it is the best sort of compromise. I could tape it off and try and keep it separate, but I'm worried about anything bleeding into it. So just to stop that, a very light layer of shellac. Now it's a blonde shellac. It's something I mix at home here in the workshop. Look at that. Wow. Okay, this is looking really good. I'm very pleased with how that has dried. I haven't finished completely with colour matching, but what I want to do now is put a layer of hard wax oil on. So it is a hard wax based on natural plant oils, sunflower oil, soybean oil, thistle oil and waxes. Completely free from white spirit. So no, not all of those products would have been available in the 16th century. However, it's not a modern varnish, it's not a polyurethane, it's a hard wax, and we don't know how this would have been finished. Possibly it might have been painted, and also it's had hundreds of years of sitting by fires, peat fires, wood fires, coal fires. And we want to get that balance right of looking aged, but also it needs a protective coating. So I'm going to go for a hard wax oil. I'm going to use a stiff brush and a cloth, and it's a sort of wipe on, wipe off, and I'm looking forward to how this goes. So I'll be quite generous to start with to get into all the corners, particularly where we've got our waxes, but ultimately I'm going to wipe all of this off again. So it's a classic wax on, wax off. And it really does require looking at it in all three dimensions: above, below, top, bottom, side, because there's always an angle or a corner that's dry. Right, now start wiping that. It goes a long way, but I wanted to apply it quite thick just to that first part. Look at that. Okay, so I've applied the hard wax oil. I'm going to let that dry. I've done a little bit more colour matching, but for now I'm very pleased with how it's going, and assuming this dries okay, maybe a little bit more touch up, we'll be ready to put some really good wax on. Okay, so the hard wax oil has now dried, and what I'm going to do is take a piece of paper. It's 5000 grit, so very, very high grit, which means not very aggressive, and I'm actually going to use the other side as well, which is just paper, and that's just to smooth off any little nits and pieces before we get to the wax finish. Now we come to my favourite bit, which is the final finish. We're going to be using Gilboy's Antique Gold. I think this certainly qualifies. And I'm going to be using wire wool, very soft, 4/0, but I've also cut the edge off a brush to get into some of the detailed work as well. So apply the wax and leave for 20 minutes and buff up to magic. Okay, now for the absolute best bit of the project for me, buffing. I've got a bristle brush and also a soft cloth, and we're going to give this a nice buff and see what comes up. So this was a particularly dog-chewed part, and this is where we put in our wax-based filler, and it's a trade-off. If I'd used a really hard modern filler and carved it to be exactly the right shape, so rigid right angles and the exact ogee again, that would look odd. If I'd left it just dog-chewed and just stained it, there would have been sharp edges or chunks and obviously damaged. So what I'm trying to do is get a balance, and I'm quite pleased that here you can see the lines of the grain, and then the other type of wood that goes in between the grain has receded a bit, but that looks like aging, as you can see down here with these lines as the wood has aged. It doesn't say it's been chewed by a dog. It does look like there's been some bashes and dings. Also trying very hard to keep a little bit of the colour. So this redder oak that came out further up in the top and that you can see along here. So one easy thing to do would have just been to dye it a sort of Jacobean, dark Jacobean black again to hide it. And that would have been wrong. But also there have been some repairs with different woods, so that has needed to be darkened. So a balancing act and a trade-off all the way across. But this is coming along nicely, and I think in the end is going to look authentic and not noticeably chewed, but suitably aged. What a pleasure it has been to work on this very, very old chair, and very grateful for the comments and feedback and support which I've received following the first video, so thank you. It is interesting, the difference between repair, restoration and conservation. So hopefully it's turned out well, and hopefully it lasts for many more years to come. And also the work that I did was sensitive and reversible. So I'd be interested to hear what you think in the comments, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.